Three directors walk into a bar and they realize that they all know each other. It's John, Jane, and Joan. They went to grad school together and they haven't seen each other in a while. And this is a bar in an airport, and they're all getting ready to board flights to head off to different parts of the country to start their next project. And of course, they're eager to hear what that is. And through a strange coincidence, they all discover they are getting ready to direct the same play, Macbeth. And John, Jane, and Joan, of course, need to grab a table and start talking about their different approaches to their three productions in different parts of the country. And John goes first. He was always kind of that way, even in grad school. And he starts talking about how he's going to do his show in Chicago. And he sees the play as very brutal. It's very cold, hard, and savage. It's really about toxic masculinity, masculine power, unchecked by the rule of law, by society, by civilization. When all those things are kind of broken, there's nothing to stop that masculine power from running amok and destroying everything, and even eventually destroying itself. And he loves the setting of the play. He starts talking about how this sort of wild, ancient, barbaric Scotland is sort of full of mystery and all this sort of wild, tangled forest and all this sort of pagan ritual and feel to it. He just loves that idea of it being this sort of strange, otherworldly place. Also loves the idea of like fog in the play. And like, can we do some air lighting, some haze in the theater? I love the idea of it being not clear to see exactly what's on stage. So there's fog, or it's hazy, or maybe there's gauzy curtains, or we can see forms, but we can't quite make them out. And remember, the play starts on a battlefield. They're kind of stumbling off the battle at the beginning of the play, and then that's when they meet the witches, and they're not quite sure what they're looking at. They're sort of confused by what they're seeing. So that idea of the battlefield smoke kind of rolling off, and all of that is part of this world that really is in civil war. That's something important to bear in mind in the play, that this is a place full of castles, a place full of fortifications, of stone walls, of battlements, of portcullises, of this heavy fortification, because all around this world are men with big swords, and they're angry and aggressive and trying to use their power, their force to get their way. And the men in the play just all really need to be right on the edge of the boil. Lots of shouting, lots of thumping around. These are big, powerful men in armor and heavy boots, and they're using enormous swords. And the fight scenes in the play need to be just these clashes where I'm thinking even maybe of putting like microphones on the shields or the swords, so the sound designer can like play with the reverb and really kind of make them sound even more. So when those swords hit a shield, that it just kind of fills the theater with this huge reverberant noise. We really need to be taken aback, like we're sitting right on the edge of the field. Well, a bunch of NFL linebackers clash into each other. That's the kind of energy that I really want to get out of these scenes, because that's who these guys would be if they were alive today. They would be, sports stars, because they have that level of testosterone. And so all through the play, we just need to be afraid when a man walks on stage that they're just going to lose it at any minute. And there's these sudden sort of snaps of violence. The warriors, the knights in this, they're not knights in shining armor. They're strange, pagan, barbarian feeling alien. They're big guys with greasy hair, and they're sweaty and they're smelly. And they just need to really contrast against the real victims in the play, which are all the women and children. And there's a lot of women and children victims in this play. It's pretty high body count. And all of those sort of powerless victims need to be just cowering underneath the loud, bombastic energy of these men. The whole play needs to feel very fortified. I really don't want to lose that sense of it being this time of civil war, right? So there's gates, or there's rust, or there's chain. There's lots of texture to it. I love the idea of it being kind of, I don't know, mossy and wet. This is not a palace they're in. This is a fortification. They're living in a castle. They're living in a military establishment here. It's not, full of draperies and beautiful furniture. Like the idea of like there even being like armaments kind of like stacked in the corner or something. And the whole world is flame lit. I love the idea of there being this very orange natural light, this flame, even at the possibility of there are other handheld torches that the actors can carry on stage, that we really get the sense of this. Again, it's part of that whole like not being able to see clearly, because when it gets to be night, then there's lots of shadows, and the light is moving, and we're not quite, it's really easy for characters to kind of appear out of a dark shadow. And that's all going to lead into this sense of the play is actually magical. None of this weird Freudian, it's all psychological and it's in mind. No, these are real ghosts. These are real witches. These are real curses. So the madness in the play and the supernatural in the play are very real. And I love for it to be pagan and strange and exotic and somewhat seductive, but also really kind of scary at the same time. And the witches, I'm not quite sure what the witches are going to be yet, but I can tell you what they're not going to be, which is like cackly little ladies in pointy hats. sitting in front of a little cauldron or whatever. They're not Halloween witches. They need to be startling when we see them. They need to be something that's sort of strange and alien so that we have the same shocked response to them that as Macbeth does when he first encounters them. So whatever the witches are, a lot of room to maneuver there, but they do need to be actually alarming in their appearance. They need to be startling, and they need to be something that we're kind of taken aback by. And Lady Macbeth, she's got to fit into this masculine world. So maybe, well, she may be sort of feminine and seductive. She's doing it in this kind of real creepy, sort of violent way. She's this kind of like wild cat, surviving among all of this brutish violence by being dangerous and unpredictable herself, much like she describes in the play. So this world, in summary, is a world of haze, of fog, of smoke, of not being able to see clearly, of deep shadows, of fortifications, of battlements and stone, and it's cold and it's echoey and it's flame lit, and there's a lot of contrast in the lights. The lights are bright and then deep dark shadows, and it's full of magic and sort of sudden moments of horror that are going to be really startling for the audience. So Jane and Joan are excited and quite impressed and want to make sure they get out to Chicago to see John's production. Well, then Jane goes next. She's going to do her production in L.A., and she's very struck by the fact that it's called Macbeth, not Mr. Macbeth. And I think this is really a play about Lady Macbeth. It's about how seemingly powerless people use their influence and charm and glamour to manipulate others. Back in Shakespeare's day, that word glamour meant something different than it does to us. It literally was a spell. It was you were under a glamour. Somebody had cast a spell on you, and you were behaving in a way that you was out of your control. So that this notion of things being glamorous now has a much more kind of mild meaning, and I'd love to explore that idea of it being the original meaning of glamour. I was flipping through a magazine, and I came across this vodka ad, and there was this movie star, and she was standing inside of a picture frame or something, or maybe it was a mirror, and she was very elegantly dressed, and the whole scene was very glossy and pretty, but there was a strange, like, disembodied hand reaching through the wall, this kind of Cocteau-like way, with this bottle on it. But the thing that really struck me was down at her feet were these broken shards of glass that were like daggers lying on the floor. And I thought, if she takes one step, she's going to be stepping on these broken glass shards. So it was this contrast between how glamorous, how beautiful and glossy and luxurious she looked, but then there was this hidden danger right there at her feet. And so that got me looking at other kinds of ads of other kinds of sort of rich bars and places where the cocktails are very expensive. It got me thinking about the way that wine can look like blood, and that there's all of these very exotic, exclusive places that you can go into, this sort of demi-monde world where very beautiful, wealthy people are enjoying fancy cocktails. And I got to thinking about those, those little swords that they stick fruit on, olives or whatever. Wouldn't it be great if Lady Macbeth came on stage with like a Cosmo or something, and she's got a couple of those little swords piercing like some cranberries or some fruit or whatever. And before she says anything, she takes that little sword and she puts it in her mouth and sucks off the fruit, and then drops the little spear thingy into the glass, and it kind of clatters, and then she sets it down, and then she says her first line. A great way they kind of establish her kind of dominance. We're just staring at her in silence as she kind of does her thing before she moves on to her actual dialogue. It's going to really help establish her character. And then thinking about all of these fancy cocktails and how oftentimes they're very vibrantly colored. They have these real saturated colors, and even the ice has this kind of almost like slimy look to it. It's glossy and shiny and saturated, and that got me thinking about like glass block, and could that be part of the world, the part of the set? Because glass block can appear cold and hard and ice-like and slippery, but then you can also light it and very quickly make it very saturated and change the color and the appearance of it just by the backlight that you shine on it. And it can have almost a sort of neon glow quite easily. And I love the idea of that kind of shiny, glossy feel. Maybe there's sort of vinyl in the costumes or even in the sets or whatever, and there's spiked heels, and it's not quite, sort of BDSM, but it's kind of close. And that casting for Lady Macbeth, she's just got to be so incredibly compelling on stage. I mean, we all have to be looking at her at all times, and her look has got to be very kind of unique. So maybe there's something, and maybe it's a little goth, or she's got something kind of very much femme fatale about her. No matter what she does, what her look is, it is very sort of dangerous, and there's something kind of I don't know, scary about her, even though she's glamorous at the same time. There's a real underlying scariness below her. All the other women in the show are just wallflowers compared to her. They're just going to be also rans, just kind of up against the wall. Maybe even they're dressed in a kind of a couture that is infantilizing to them. They're kind of childlike, or maybe the costumes are so extreme in their couture that they look weird and doll-like. And the men are definitely not John's football players. These are kind of boy toys. They're really tools that can be just wrapped around Lady Macbeth's finger. I love the idea of it being set in this kind of very noisy, kind of club-like world. This is a nightclub where there's a guy with a clipboard and a velvet rope, and he's probably packing a gun too, up at the door. And only the privileged, only the beautiful people get into the space, and that it is this kind of noisy, smoke-filled space. I love the air lighting. I love the saturated lights. I want like a techno beat kind of going on throughout the place, and then it really does feel like there's this kind of like nighttime world of the very privileged, beautiful people that have access to this. And I love the idea of all of that techno light, kind of concert lighting that can then suddenly shift into eerie, strange, otherworldly light with just a quick instantaneous cue, and then suddenly we're into some strange supernatural world. The witches, I'm still working on the witches. I'm not sure, but they're going to have a look all their own, but it's going to be something that is very distinctly different than the rest of the pretty people. So maybe they're trying so hard with their couture that they're kind of grotesque in the way that they look, or maybe that I don't know, there's kind of a punk feel to it or something. There's some kind of look that's very different, even though it is very distinctive. I don't want them to be sort of mousy. They need to be very strong statements, but they're not going to be welcome in that world full of beautiful people. And then at some point in the play, when the blood starts flowing, then I just love the idea of there actually being like blood on the floor, like the idea of the broken glass. I see how we can do that with, keeping the actors safe, but, can some of the glass block wall break or something? Is there some way that we can really get that idea of that stepping forward onto those broken glass shards and just making the stage sort of slippery with blood? So all of these beautiful people in their beautiful clothes are just marred by the violence in the play. So Joan goes last. She's going to do her show in New York, and she's very struck by the idea that this is a play about absolute power leading to absolute corruption. Because Macbeth starts out as a pretty decent guy. He's certainly loyal. He's a good soldier. He likes his king and all that sort of thing. And it's only when he starts getting seduced by the idea of power that he starts doing horrible things. And where will that stop? I think it's relevant to America today. I don't want it to be about the current political situation in America. I just think it's about power today. I just want the sense that the play is set in a capital city. No Washington Monument in the background. It's not Washington, D.C. It's just a capital city, a place of power. So we want it to be full of limestone and, sort of tall buildings with lots of windows. Maybe the windows are mirrored glass. It needs to be this sort of harsh, echoing world, lots of polished floors. You can hear the footfalls of people walking across the stage, very much so. The idea that it's sort of set in the lobby of a courthouse or something. It needs to have this very sort of seat of power feel to it and be very, not white necessarily, but, sort of very bleached of color and very sort of cold and hard and echoing and the sort of place that you would find powerful people. And these people move around their world in armored SUVs. They've got staff with them. They have bodyguards around them, and they're constantly being followed by cameras. So whether there's actual TV cameras maybe on the stage, we actually have, reporters chasing them around, shouting questions to them, or there's a paparazzi kind of feel to it. There's camera flashes. It needs to be very glaring and noisy. Like they don't ever have any peace. I love the idea of the lighting being really desaturated, really harsh, white, bright light. It's mobile TV camera lights. It's kind of this glaring light that's shining on them at all times. Their clothes are very, very expensive, tailored clothes, but they're very subtle. They're not wearing anything obnoxious. They're wearing Brooks Brothers suits. They're wearing, $10,000 little black dresses or whatever. The kind of very glamorous, powerful, subtle clothes of senators and senators' wives. The bodyguards, the soldiers in here are going to have their trench coats, and I love the idea of the little earpieces that really have a Secret Service feel to them, mirrored glasses, that these are sort of stern men that are kind of following them around. And it does need to have this sort of surveillance feel to it. I don't want it to necessarily be Big Brother, but I definitely want the sense that there are cameras everywhere. So when the paparazzi or the TV cameras aren't right there in their faces, that there's surveillance cameras. They're always being watched. Again, it's not Big Brother, but it's the sense that the cameras are there for them. It's their cameras, right? It's people who are kind of looking over their shoulder all the time, that there's a security guard on the other side of that screen, and that those people that are always watching can send out the guys with the guns very quickly, and that all of that is kind of behind the scenes. So the soldier is not standing there in fatigues, covered with weaponry, but he's just sort of a guy in a trench coat standing next to them, and that when the violence happens, it's very sudden and startling. Somebody just opens up their jacket, a gun comes out, there's a flash and a bang, and there's suddenly blood all over these white walls. And it's very sudden and abrupt in the way that, assassinations take place. It isn't long duels full of beautiful stage choreography. It needs to be something that literally an audience member could miss it if they were rubbing their eyes for a moment, and then bam, it's over. Somebody's down on the ground. And that's that sort of sudden violence that I'd love to see in the play. So that's basically 3 different approaches to this. This is probably the most important slide I want you to be aware of. This is John, Jane, and Joan all doing the same production. And plays that have really kind of good, meaty text to them can really get lots of themes pulled out of them. That doesn't mean that a play that has a simple or straightforward theme is a bad play. It just means that the reason why we remount Shakespeare plays or Greek plays or classic American plays or whatever, the reason why we go back to those so often is that the themes allow so much interpretation. The theme is basically what the play is about. It's going to be a sentence or two, and it's what you think the play is about. And you're going to use this structure, and I kind of think about it as sort of a pyramid. That theme is up on top, and it's the shortest, and then you're going to talk about the world of the play, and then you're going to talk about what the designers are going to do to support those first 2. So the theme is really simply what is the play about. So John thinks the play is about toxic masculinity, basically. He's saying unchecked masculine power, unchecked by the rule of law, leads to disaster. It leads to barbarism. That's a simple idea. And it's right there in Macbeth. It isn't like that was something that he just sort of pulled out of the air and thought, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we made this play about something that it's totally not about? Well, then Jane says, no, actually, I think it's really about, look at all the people that are being twisted. Their wills are being twisted, including Macbeth. He's sort of kind of a tool in the play, right? So he gets twisted by the witches, by Lady Macbeth, by all of the other characters in the play are all kind of following around. They're not really in charge of their destinies. They're sort of being told where to go and what to do. And that's certainly there in the play as well. The notion of that a powerful personality is mightier than the sword. That's definitely a theme of Joan's production. And then Jane's production is that sort of political sense of the notion of absolute power corrupting absolutely. That's a pretty solid idea. That's also there in the play. So Macbeth begins as a decent guy, and it's only as he gets tempted with this idea of being king that he starts saying, like, yeah, I want that, and I will do anything to get that. And so those are 3 different themes. They're all in the play. None of those are something that the directors made up. They're all coming from the play, but they are the starting point of 3 very different productions. And that leads to that next column down, world of the play. And world of the play is, how does the environment feel? How does the play feel in order to meet that theme? So in other words, you would not have the sort of big, hairy, sweaty, barbarian Macbeth of John's play walk into either of the other 2 plays. That would be very out of place. Like, what is this big, sweaty dude with a giant sword doing in these other 2 plays? Unless, of course, and we do this occasionally, the director is trying to do a counterpoint. It's like trying to put something juxtaposing two different things for a point. But that's probably not the right choice for either one of these productions. If suddenly this barbarian Macbeth walked into one of the other plays, it would kind of mess with the themes of those plays. Then the audience would be confused and would say, like, what? What did that mean, right? So we want a world of the play, the costume choices, the set choices, the lighting and sound choices to support that theme. Another word that you will hear for this term, I like world of the play, but a lot of people would just simply say mood. The reason why I don't go with mood is that it implies that the play is moody, like but it doesn't have to be moody in a sense of it being kind of like saxophones and blue lights and, whatever. It doesn't need to be moody, but the mood of the play. What's the mood or the world of the play? You can use those synonymously. Lots of people use both or either. But the idea that I want to get across here is that the world of the play is where all the adjectives live. So theme theme is idea. What's the play about? And then how does the play need to feel? How do we want the audience to respond to what they see and hear on stage? That's world of the play. And when you go to describe that in your papers, that's going to be, a paragraph. That's going to be several sentences. So theme might be a sentence or two, maybe three, but probably not. You probably don't need much more than that. Whereas in World of the Play, you're going to go on for a little bit because you're going to describe it needs to feel smoky and mysterious and eerie and violent and rusty and cold and sweaty and all those kinds of things. Or it needs to feel glamorous and slick and techno and bright and saturated. And those are all adjective words that designers just eat that stuff up with a spoon. Yes, thank you. Those are real words when they get those from a director that they can immediately get to work with in their designs. That's World of the Play. And then finally, the last part of that would be something that really a designer would come up with, that design concept. How will each of the designers then make choices that evoke that world in their particular design area? So the set designer of John's play is going to be looking at all kinds of stone and cracks and rust and steel and things that are going to feel very fortress-like, right? In order to create the world of the play that John is envisioning, this fortress-like world, a world at war. Whereas, and it's going to be very different for Joan's play, or Jane's, I forget, where it's set in that sort of glossy nightclub, where it's going to be also like velvet and vinyl and glossiness and shininess and cold, all the glass block she was talking about, right? That's a very different world of the play. The costume is very clearly different between those two productions as well. And then the sound we talked about. One of the directors John was talking about how it needs to be loud and reverberant and clashing. And then the nightclub version is very sort of a techno beat and sexy, and it's got a kind of rhythm to it, and it's the chaka sound, kind of thing going underneath there. And then there's maybe a very different sound in that kind of the capital city approach. So all of those different design concepts are going to be what the designers will say, all right, I've heard the theme of the play. I've heard all those beautiful words about what the world of the play, what the mood needs to be. So here are the choices that I'm going to make to support that world of the play. So you're kind of working your way up from the bottom of the pyramid. So this is probably the most important. We're going to talk about how we do that. What are the different choices and what are the elements of design and composition that designers employ to do this, but this is kind of the goal. This right here is a director comes out and says, I think this is a play about blah, 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 and it needs to feel, and we need to respond to that world like this. And then sometimes they will go a little farther and say, so I think that I want to see some glass block in the set, and I want to see real kind of haute couture costumes. I want the costumes to be very exaggerated. Maybe they will even go so far as to actually address the different design areas. Frequently they do. Or if they don't, and they just leave it at world of the play, then the designers pick it up there and say, oh, okay, well, in order for that world to exist to support that idea, how about if the costumes look like this? Or if the set looks like this, or the lights are this kind of color, or this kind of movement or pattern, or we have this kind of underscoring in the sound. All those are the different choices the designers are going to make to support the world of the play and the theme. So that's kind of, here you go, first day. There you go. Here's the answer. This is the real goal of this class is to explore this right here. And what are all the things that we use? What do we do in order to achieve this? So you'll be seeing this little list in the future in other lectures. And I'll also want you to use this sort of 3-paragraph structure in a lot of the papers that you write when you're talking about what you think the play that we're dealing with is about, how it needs to feel, and what your choices are that's going to support that mood of the world of the play. Hopefully that all made sense, and I'll see you soon.